Back on Morning Line, thanks for joining us, talking about the stigma of mental health, especially as it relates to young people. And during this pandemic, a lot of kids dealing with some of these issues more than perhaps than usual. With us this morning to talk about Dr. Desiree Kelly and also Heather Smith. They're with Mental Health America of the Mid-South. And there are a lot of tools I know that you guys use to deal with children depending on their age. And we were talking as we went to the break about I See Hope, a program mascot that you use. And also, I guess I'm seeing here you also have a bandage and a life preserver, images and items that can help at least kids relate. So what do you have?
Yeah, so you actually stole my punchline a little bit there, but this is I See Hope, and you can see he has two very special characteristics that other ducks don't necessarily have. He has his life preserver, which has his name, I See Hope, and he also has a bandage on his head.
Okay.
And so we use I See Hope to really demonstrate to the kids two very important points. The first being that everyone deserves help and deserves support if they need it. And so the life preserver really goes to show that no matter who you are, if you are struggling, if you are needing help, you should be able to speak up and get the help that you need. And the second point is demonstrated by the bandage, which really goes to say that mental health illnesses are real, but they're also treatable. And there is recovery, there is treatment that is available for anyone who might be struggling or might be going through different experiences that really challenge their mental health. And so those topics can be kind of difficult for kids to wrap their minds around and to really take home. But we have found that by introducing this sweet duck and really pointing out those two different meaningful messages, kids walk away really having those points clear, and they remember them later. And so we find him to be very useful.
I think that's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, we just put an image up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to throw out, and Heather did an amazing job explaining the two things that make I See Hope different from every other duck in the world, right? But we've had this school-based program since 1997, and I See Hope joined us in 2000. And before COVID, we were going to have an I See Hope birthday party at selected schools in Middle and West Tennessee, but we had to push it back until, it's safe to be around large groups of children and adults, because we want to social distance and we want to practice the precautions put out by our public health officials. But at the end of the day, I love our message. The bandage, the reminder, mental health illnesses are real and treatable, and the life preservers let us know. And that's how we usually segue into our trusted adults, that every life is valuable and worth saving. So that is something that we really repeat over and over again, so our participants will know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely a message worth repeating. Now, earlier we talked about things like test anxiety, and it's real, but in the scheme of things compared to some, and I wanted to bring this up because this was just in the news recently, the real trauma of dealing with grief and potentially even for a child PTSD, and I would imagine both of you are aware of that horrible, horrible school bus crash that happened a couple of days ago outside Chattanooga. The bus driver died, a 7-year-old died on board. There were elementary school students on board that bus, and I just can't even imagine the trauma, obviously, for the family of those who lost loved ones, but every child on that bus, what they had to go through. And not only that, every child at that school or children elsewhere who maybe watched the news that night and saw that and realized, wow, this happened to someone just like me. I'm just curious, when you're dealing with something that awful and so serious, so that no one should ever have to deal with that. I mean, how will Mental Health America, how would you deal with something along those lines?
So one of the things about the Erasing the Stigma program, we go into speaking to the different age groups differently, right? But we all make sure it's age appropriate information. So from our kindergartners all the way probably up to our 5th graders, depending on their maturity level, we do a storybook time. We discuss mental versus mental illness. We talk about I See Hope, and we give them the opportunity to discuss questions from the book. And we have several different books that's in our curriculum. And then we give them all a swag item, because everybody loves swag items. But I mention this because each topic that kids can deal with, we have a story or curriculum dedicated to help them get through it. And what we do is we introduce the resources, and then we ideally is next up to the counselor, the teachers, and the parents to reinforce the things that we talked about. And for that particular case, we would probably get calls from counselors or teachers saying, can you come and talk about worry? Can you come and talk about anxiety? Can you come and talk about how to handle a bad day? And so those are the things that we will talk on, and we will touch on some of the experiences that they are experiencing and what to do to best get the best help. And it's always number one to find your trusted adult and let them know, hey, I'm struggling with this. This is a lot. What do we do? But again, we are educators. So our goal is to overflood the community with the overflow of information about mental health resources and what they can do to live their best life. And so that was one of the things that we would do. We would also offer options for parents, because that's another great option that we can talk to them and discuss some of the things that they might see and what some of these things might look like, because we're not diagnosing. We're just providing the information so they can get the best services for their kids, because every kid is different, right?
Sure.
So every kid has to deal with something differently internally, not to mention ACEs, any childhood adverse trauma that they've already experienced. And so bringing us in to do the education portion will give them a sense of, you know what, it's okay that I talk about my mental health concerns. It's okay if I had a bad day. It's okay that this happened. But what's not okay is that if I get angry because it has happened and I start acting out and hurting people. What's not okay is if I don't tell anybody and then I go into sadness, and we all know sadness leads to depression. And then what does depression lead to?
Mm-hmm. Something worse.
Unfortunately, sure. Suicide, right? And so at that end, that's what we want to do.
And if I may just add to that, another resource that we provide is training for teachers, training for school administration, really community members at large in something called trauma-informed care. And what trauma-informed care really, the goal of that is just to help these grown-ups who work with kids to understand that if a child has been through severe trauma, we might not understand fully the diagnosis, we might not be those clinicians, but we can learn skills and tactics for approaching how we interact with a child in a way that will not re-traumatize them, in a way that helps them feel safe, in a way that helps them understand that they have resiliency in themselves and they are empowered to be able to have new opportunities in their life and overcome the things that they've been through. And so while neither Dr. Kelly nor I are trained clinicians, one thing that we do provide is having that conversation with folks that work with kids or even potentially parents about what it means to interact with a child in a way that's trauma informed.
Yeah, and almost always in cases like what I just brought up, I'm sure today, tomorrow, and maybe the rest of this week and next, there'll be counselors at the school. We always hear about that when these incidents happen, to be there, so brought in addition to whatever they already have to help them deal with it. And children, it's amazing how resilient they can be bouncing back from things like this. But it does take time. It's not a one-time chit-chat talk. It's nothing like that. It's kind of revisiting it and observing, and hopefully with time, they find a better way to deal with it and they're able to get on with their lives without obsessing about what they saw. But it's different for every child, right? I mean, it could be a few days for one child. It could be a few months for another child to put this behind them. And I guess that's just up to the counselors to pay attention to that and see who needs the extra help.
And I'm glad that you said that it's different for every child, so it won't look the same. That's why we're very careful not to diagnose and just provide information on the topic that is requested from the schools. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everybody receives the same education and the same help. I'm so glad that Heather mentioned the trauma-informed presentations, because we also offer mental health and stigmas and what it could look like in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. And there's another SEL session that we have for teachers, as well as that we now can offer them mental health youth first aid so they can recognize and notice. Because in any of our roles, what we want to do is see something, say something, do something. And that's the most important thing that we can do as parents, teachers, counselors, and children.
We're going to take a quick break on that note. We'll be back with our final segment and our two guests right after this. Stay with us.